Alright, year 11, as promised, second video on Middle East conflicts, Middle East wars. Looking today at the Suez Crisis, 1956. Okay, so I'll just get straight into it. As per usual, looking at any event in history, particularly a war or a conflict, we're going to look at causes, events and consequences. So first of all, background or causes. Let's look at the background first. First of all, what is the Suez Canal, just in case you've forgotten? Well, it's a canal, obviously, which links the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea. Okay, it's particularly important for countries in Europe who have been importing things from maybe the Far East or the eastern side of Africa. It helps cut out the path all the way around Africa, where you can basically cut through the top part of Africa, the northeastern part of Africa, through Egypt and get into the Mediterranean Sea. Saves you having to go all the way around Africa. We've looked at that in class in a bit of detail. So it links the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea, and it's very, very important for that purpose. It was built by the French, basically using slave labour. It was built in the 1860s using slave labour of the Egyptians. Not particularly nice origins, not particularly nice origins of the Suez Canal, quite controversial actually. But it's built by the French, as I say, very, very important for countries in Europe, particularly Britain and France. They were the major stakeholders in it. They were the ones who kind of made, who had the most use of it and certainly made the most money out of it, because you'd have to pay a toll to go through basically, and Britain and France were the ones who pocketed the profits of it. As I say, very, very important for Europe, because 2/3 of Europe's oil came through the canal in 1955. So a year before the crisis that we're going to look at, 2/3 of the oil that Europe uses comes through or came through the canal. So obviously, I don't need to tell you how important oil is. So it's really, really, really important for Europe, and hence why Britain and France see it as so valuable. They get their oil through it, and also they make a lot of money out of it. So what caused the Suez Crisis? 1956, we've got a Suez Crisis. What caused it? Well, there are loads of causes. I'll go through a few of them now. The first one is Arab humiliation after defeat in 1948-49. Basically, the Arab nations, as we know, were humiliated by the defeat in 1948 and 49. And they've been looking for a way of getting back at Israel. And to a certain extent the West as well, because they've helped out Israel in the war. So they're looking for some kind of fight back, and the Suez Crisis, as I'll come to in a little while, kind of gives them the opportunity for this fight back, or gives Egypt anyway the opportunity to get kind of a little bit of revenge on Israel and the West. As I say, there was anger at the West because the USA and the UN have been seen to be on Israel's side. Obviously the UN partition plan seemed to favour Israel. As I said before in the previous video, they got 55% of the region of Palestine when only 33% of the population was Jewish. So the UN are seen to have sided with Israel. USA obviously have given a lot of support to Israel in the 1948-49 war and since that war. So again, the West, you know, USA, Britain, France, etc., aren't viewed particularly positively in the Arab nations, in Egypt and the other Arab nations. So you know, the idea of kind of getting one over on them is quite a popular idea amongst some. There's heightened tension between Egypt and Israel, and there are lots of reasons for this. One of the reasons for the heightened tension between Israel and Egypt is the role of Nasser, who I'll come on to talk about in just a second. He plays a big role in really raising the tension between Israel and Egypt to the point where it blows up basically in the form of this Suez Crisis. Another reason for the tension is that in 1955 Israel had attacked Gaza, which was obviously an Arab area. So they'd attacked Gaza as a result of kind of this bubbling up tension. They'd attacked in 1955. So again, there's the element of get some revenge, have a fight back after these attacks. Egypt had also bought a huge amount of weaponry from Czechoslovakia, much like Israel had done in previous years. Egypt had now purchased a huge amount of weaponry from Czechoslovakia, who are obviously linked almost directly to the USSR. So Israel are looking at that as going, oh, hang on, Egypt and to an extent the USSR are kind of preparing for some kind of war or conflict, which again raises the tension between the two sides. Also, there have been raids by the Fedayeen, who have based themselves in Egypt, amongst other countries, but in Egypt in particular, there have been several raids by the Fedayeen across the Egyptian-Israeli border. They've killed a lot of Israelis in these. So again, and on the flip side, Israeli reprisal actions have killed a lot of Egyptians in return. So again, all of this has just raised the tension. Something is going to blow up between these two countries majorly, and the Suez Crisis is it. So they're the main causes really of the Suez Crisis. There are others, but they're the main ones. So the role of Nasser, I talked about Nasser before. What role does he play, Colonel Nasser? Well, he became the president of Egypt in 1954. He was an Arab nationalist. We know about all this already, but he was an Arab nationalist, so he's very, very keen on uniting all the Arab countries behind a cause, and the cause in this case is kind of getting rid of Israel, or certainly damaging Israel. So he was an Arab nationalist, very keen on destroying Israel, damaging Israel. He had a major gripe with the West, for the reasons that I've mentioned before, but one of the big reasons why Nasser in 1956 is so angry at the West is because he had wanted to build something called the Aswan Dam, okay, which would have generated a lot of electricity for Egypt, so they could become self-sufficient, because that's one of the things that he wants. He wants he wants Egypt, to be self-sufficient, not relying on other countries, which beforehand they had been, particularly Britain and France, have been quite reliant on other countries to help them. So he thinks, right, I need this Aswan Dam to generate electricity to keep Egypt self-sufficient. And Britain and the USA had promised to fund this, to give Egypt, to give Nasser a loan to pay for this. And in 1956, after the USA and Britain find out about Egypt buying the weapons from Czechoslovakia, which is basically the USSR, they refuse to give the money over, because obviously, as we know from our other studies, the USA and the USSR in particular hate each other. Yeah, it's the height of the Cold War. They don't like each other. So the USA are like, well, if you're going to side with the USSR, we're not going to have anything to do with you, because you're dealing with our enemy. So they refuse to give the money for the Aswan Dam, and that really angers Nasser. He gets really angry about that. So, as a result, basically, of this, he nationalised the Suez Canal on the 26th of July 1956. He takes control of it. He also, on that day, he closes the Suez Canal to Israeli shipping in particular, and also he blocks off the Straits of Tiran. Now, I don't have a map right in front of me, but Israel use the Suez Canal, but they also, a key area of Israeli shipping is the Straits of Tiran, which is based at the southern end of Israel, and Egypt blocked this off, and this really cuts off Israel's access to the Red Sea, which again really damages their shipping. They've still got access to the sea, they've still got access to the Mediterranean, because most of Israel's western side is on the Mediterranean Sea, but their access to the Red Sea is cut off basically by Egypt at the same time. So that angers Israel. It's angered Britain and France because the Suez Canal, they had control of it and now they no longer do. And it's angered Israel because they can't access the Suez Canal, and what's more, they can't access the Red Sea because the Straits of Tiran have been blocked by Egypt. So, wrong bit of paper. Helps if you're organised, Mr. Austin. Right, here we go. So, what happens next? Well, we have what's known as the Sevres Agreement, or sometimes referred to as the Sevres Protocol. Okay. Now, this takes place on the 24th of October. I'll hold this up so you can read it. It takes place on the 24th of October, 1956. And it was a secret meeting in France between British, French and Israeli representatives, I should say. Now, the plan involved Israel invading Egypt and seizing control of the canal. And then Britain and France would then ask both sides to withdraw, and they anticipated, and they were right with this, they anticipated that Egypt would not do that, would say, no, we're not going to withdraw our troops, because we've been invaded. So they anticipated that Egypt did not withdraw their troops, at which point Britain and France would intervene, basically to protect the canal, coming as like peacekeepers, basically. So it was very underhand. It was a really, really underhand agreement. So what happens? The events of the Suez Crisis. We've looked at the causes, now we're on to the events. The events of the Suez Crisis. So on the 29th of October 1956, lots of paper today, 29th of October 1956, Israel invaded Egypt according to the Sevres Agreement, the Sevres Protocol, and by the 30th, within a day, they'd reached the canal. The Israeli army moved through the Sinai, which we know about, moved through the Sinai desert with real speed. They get to the canal within a day. That's some turn of pace, which again kind of highlights the strength of the Israeli army at the same time as well. So they'd reached the canal by the 30th of October, and on the 30th of October, Britain and France asked both sides, again according to the Sevres Protocol, they asked both sides, they asked Israel and Egypt to stop fighting, to withdraw, and Egypt, as they predicted, say, no, we're not going to withdraw. At which point, Britain and France then bombed Egyptian airfields. But eventually they're forced to back down from US pressure. The US say, whoa, what are you doing? If you carry this on, well, the USA were really worried that if this fighting carried on much longer, the USSR would join in on Egypt's side, and the whole thing would blow up into a full-scale war, potentially even a nuclear war. Both America and the USSR have got nuclear weapons by this point. They've had them for a number of years by this point, and there's a worry that all it takes is one war to kind of develop and grow and spiral into a full-scale nuclear war. It's a real fear at this time. As I say, height of the Cold War. We're certainly getting there anyway. So the USA say to Britain and France, "Whoa, what are you doing? Stop! Remove yourselves from the conflict, basically." And the USA then go to the UN and they back a resolution which goes through on the 2nd of November, a UN resolution, and it called for, as you can see here, an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal of all forces, so British, French, Israeli and Egyptian, from the Egyptian territory. And they do. All forces involved do withdraw. And that's the end of the crisis. What are the consequences then? What are the consequences of the crisis? Well, again, there are loads of these, so I'll fire through them. First of all, Nasser is hailed as a hero. He emerges as, in a way, the leader of the Arab world. A lot of the other Arab nations kind of look to him as their figurehead. He's kind of dared to take on Israel and the West, and kind of come out not so much a victor, but certainly come out with with his head held high. And Egypt have accomplished quite a bit. I'll come on to this in a minute. They've accomplished quite a bit from the whole Suez Crisis. So again, Nasser is looked at as a bit of a hero, or as quite a lot of a hero, by the rest of the Arab world. And as I say, many other Arab nations look up to him. Syria in particular, Syria and Egypt form a bit of an alliance, which doesn't last too long, lasts about 5 years, but they form a real alliance, Egypt and Syria, as a result of this, partly because Nasser's looked at with such respect and hero worship in the Arab world. Nasser now had complete control of the canal. That's one thing that Egypt have gained. Beforehand, even though they've nationalised the canal and they've had control of it, it's been a bit on shaky ground. Now Egypt has very much got complete control of the Suez Canal. Another gain for Egypt and Israel to an extent is UN peacekeepers were now sent to keep the peace on the Egypt-Israeli border. Obviously there's been a lot of trouble on both sides of the border, where the Fedayeen have been moving into Israel and causing trouble, and likewise Israel have had reprisal attacks over the Egyptian border. Now UN peacekeepers are put across the border to try and prevent that. It's not 100% successful, but at least they're there. UN peacekeepers try and keep peace along this troublesome, or what has been a troublesome, Egyptian-Israeli border. But there are some victories for Israel, and they're these three here. Well, first of all, Israel had managed to destroy quite a few of these Fedayeen bases. Again, kind of linking back to the previous point, these Fedayeen bases have been a real trouble spot for Israel, and during the attack towards the canal, they have managed to defeat quite a few of these Fedayeen bases. The Straits of Tiran were open, so again, that real problem for Israel has been dealt with. And Israel's military reputation was enhanced. As I said before, they really go through the Sinai with an incredible amount of speed. You know, in one day they get through the entire Sinai Peninsula and get to the Suez Canal. It's really, really impressive. And again, the Arab nations certainly, at least that's the way I interpret it, the Arab nations, I think, were certainly quite threatened by Israel still. They think, wow, you know, they're pretty impressive, Israel. The way they really kind of cannonballed through the Sinai shows that they're a force to be reckoned with. And this maybe contributes to the fact that, or highlights the fact, I should say, that there wasn't another full-scale conflict, a full-scale war, for another 11 years. As we know, the next war that we've looked at in the course is the Six-Day War between Israel and Egypt, and that doesn't take place until 1967. So 11 years after the Suez Crisis. Now, I think that the fact that Israel have done so well at the start of the Suez Crisis probably contributes to this, that the Arab nations are thinking, well, we daren't go to war with Israel because, you know, what happened last time, or what happened to Egypt, I should say, last time. You know, there was a real... Egypt really kind of had a great defeat at first at the start of the Suez Crisis because the Israeli army was just so good. So that's another consequence. Another one, Britain and France were humiliated because obviously they both had to back down because the USA have told them to. So their reputations have been humiliated. And it was now fairly clear that the USA and the USSR were the key foreign powers in the Middle East. They're the ones who are kind of pulling the strings to some extent. Rather than beforehand, certainly before the Second World War, it's been Britain, certainly Britain, and to an extent France, who've been kind of the major foreign powers involved in Middle Eastern politics and Middle Eastern events. Now it's very much so the USA and the USSR. Britain and France are taking a bit of a back seat. Another aside is that in Britain it's been a major crisis leading to the resignation of Anthony Eden, who'd only been Prime Minister for a year. He has to resign over this whole issue because of the way Britain have handled themselves, really. They haven't come out smelling of roses by any means. You know, the whole Sevres Agreement has been fairly underhand, as I've said. It's shown Britain to be fairly weak, certainly in the face of USA pressure, or American pressure. So again, he has to back down over that. So that's another consequence of the Suez Crisis. Right, the next war, as I say, that you need to look at, or you need to know about, is the Six-Day War in 1967. At the minute, I'm not planning on doing a video about that because you may have noticed already in the description below I've put a link to a really good documentary. We've watched a bit of this in class on the Six-Day War. So if you want to know about the Six-Day War, I would watch that personally. It's certainly better than any of my videos. It's got, you know, actual footage and lots more things going on than just me in front of the camera. If, though, you do want me to do a video, then you know what to do. Just tweet, email, or again, comment below if you would like a video making on the Six-Day War. So what I'm planning, I don't envisage that being the case, but if it is, then fair enough. Otherwise, I'm going to move straight onto the Yom Kippur War, which is obviously the war after that. But yeah, I'll give you a couple of days to let me know what you want. Again, if you've got any general requests for any other Middle Eastern videos, World War I, civil rights, or Germany, then again, tweet, email, comment below. But other than that, I will give you a couple of days, as I say, to kind of digest, keep revising. Send me any requests that you have for any future videos. But other than that, best of luck with any exams that you've got over the next couple of days. Keep up the revision, particularly for the history, and I will see you very soon. Thank you.